January 17, 1944. A bitter wind cuts across the snow-swept fields of northern France. Frost clings to the wires strung between battered poles outside a tiny Allied listening post. Inside, a lone U.S. radio operator sits hunched over his receiver, fingers trembling from the cold and caffeine, eyes scanning the blinking lights of a crude Morse key. The room smells of oil, paper, and stale coffee. Every static crackle through the headphones is a heartbeat in the frozen silence. Across the front, German generals sit in their heated command rooms, poring over maps with confident certainty. Reports arrive. Dismissed with a shrug. "Nothing here but noise," one officer mutters. Outside, the front lines are tense but deceptively quiet. Soldiers crouched in trenches, snow muffling their steps. The operator's hands tighten around the receiver. A faint series of dots and dashes pierces the hum, a signal so ordinary the enemy would call it insignificant. Yet within it lies the precise coordinates and movements that could unravel months of German planning. One signal, one operator, one chance, and in a few minutes the entire front could tilt. By early 1944, Europe was a continent suffocating under war. Germany, nearly 4 years into its blitzkrieg campaigns, controlled vast swaths of territory from the frozen Baltic coastlines to the sun-baked plains of France. Hitler's generals were confident, their strategies honed from victories in Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. Yet cracks were forming. The Eastern Front bled German manpower and material, while Allied bombing campaigns gutted factories and railways, straining logistics in ways the generals were only beginning to understand. Meanwhile, the United States, having entered the war in December 1941, was rapidly building its military presence in Europe. American soldiers trained under harsh conditions in England, learning not only to fight, but to communicate, an aspect as vital as any rifle or tank. The U.S. Army Signal Corps had become a quiet backbone of operations, specializing in intercepting enemy communications and relaying critical intelligence to commanders. Each message intercepted, each code broken, could shift the balance of an entire battle. The Germans, despite their efficiency, had a blind spot. They relied heavily on conventional reconnaissance radar, aerial photography. Spies hadn't considered individual enemy signals as minor annoyances. Their generals dismissed small intercept stations and lone operators as inconsequential, underestimating the ingenuity of Allied signals intelligence. This hubris would prove costly. On the Western Front, months of preparation were underway for what would become the pivotal battles of 1944. Soldiers dug trenches and built fortifications across Normandy, while Allied officers coordinated logistics, supply lines, and troop movements in meticulous detail. Radio operators, often overlooked, were stationed at remote posts, listening for the faintest hints of German movement. Their radios were modest, nothing like the grand, polished equipment in German command rooms, but they were tuned precisely to intercept crucial transmissions. The environment was unforgiving. Operators worked long hours in freezing temperatures, often alone, monitoring the airwaves for hours on end. Every dot and dash of Morse code carried potential significance for thousands of soldiers on both sides of the front. One misread signal could send entire battalions into ambush. One correct interpretation could save thousands of lives. In this delicate balance, a single individual could wield influence far beyond their apparent station. Signals intelligence had already proven decisive in the Mediterranean and North Africa campaigns. Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park and intercept stations in the Mediterranean had uncovered Axis plans with remarkable accuracy. U.S. operators contributed to this effort by monitoring German troop movements, logistics messages, and artillery coordinates. Yet the Germans remained largely unaware of how vulnerable their communications were. Even routine messages, if intercepted and analyzed correctly, could reveal patterns, weaknesses, and intentions. It was in this atmosphere of high stakes and overlooked opportunities that a young U.S. radio operator found himself stationed in northern France. The war was not only fought with guns and tanks, but with quiet vigilance. In rooms filled with crackling radios and stacks of cipher sheets, the Germans had their eyes on the battlefield. but their ears were deaf to the invisible threads being pulled across the airwaves. By mid-January, intelligence suggested subtle shifts in German troop movements, convoys changing routes, supply lines rerouted, and isolated units repositioned. These signals were minor on paper but critical in practice. Analysts in the Allied command knew that even one accurate intercept could provide the tactical insight needed to exploit weaknesses in the German defenses. It was a delicate dance of timing, precision, and anticipation. As the U.S. radio operator prepared his station, adjusting dials and verifying frequencies, the world around him remained unaware of the quiet storm about to break. German generals continued their confident dismissals, believing that no single radio operator could influence the vast machinery of the Wehr. Yet history was about to prove otherwise. One intercepted signal, seemingly insignificant, was poised to ripple across the front lines, shifting strategy, morale, and momentum in ways no one could yet predict. The lifeblood of modern warfare in 1944 was information. Across European armies relied on radios to transmit orders, coordinate movements, and respond to rapidly changing battle conditions. For the Germans, encrypted messages were their shield, their confidence rooted in the belief that no outsider could penetrate the layers of ciphers produced by the Enigma machines. Yet even the most complex encryption could falter under persistent surveillance, attentive analysis, and the skill of operators trained to listen for anomalies. U.S. radio operators, while lacking the sophisticated polish of German systems, compensated with vigilance and redundancy. Simple Morse code, relayed over shortwave frequencies, could traverse dozens of kilometers, bouncing off atmospheric layers to reach distant ears. Operators learned to detect subtle patterns, the length of pauses between transmissions, the peculiar repetition of certain codes. The rhythm of an operator's keying that hinted at troop concentrations or impending movements. Each intercepted signal became a puzzle, pieces of which were sent back to analysts who could construct a larger map of German operations. The Germans, by contrast, had developed a culture of hierarchical certainty. High-ranking officers trusted their intelligence reports and aerial reconnaissance, rarely questioning the validity of intercepted Allied transmissions. When low-level Allied signals were detected, they were often dismissed as background noise, misinterpreted as harmless chatter from outposts or decoy operations. This overconfidence created a blind spot, a gap in their situational awareness that a single, determined operator could exploit. By January 1944, small radio posts peppered across northern France were feeding information into a growing intelligence network. Each post operated under strict secrecy. Operators worked in isolation, aware that discovery could mean capture or death, yet the importance of their work was not lost on them. Each faint series of dots and dashes held potential consequences for thousands of soldiers on both sides of the front. A single accurately reported coordinate could avert ambushes, redirect artillery fire, or reveal the vulnerabilities in German logistics. The technology of the day imposed constraints as well. Radios were fragile, susceptible to interference, and limited in range. Operators relied on precise calibration, disciplined listening, and the endurance to sit for hours in freezing rooms or makeshift tents. Morse code itself was unforgiving. A single misread dash or dot could distort an entire message. Yet despite these challenges, operators developed an almost instinctive understanding of signal patterns, an intuition honed by repetition and necessity. In German command rooms, generals remained preoccupied with conventional indicators, movement of divisions on maps, radio silenze, or intercepted Allied reports that appeared trivial. They underestimated the potential of signals intelligence, especially the work of single operators. One officer dismissed a series of American intercepts as routine noise, while another referred to it as worthless chatter. The irony was profound. What they considered irrelevant would soon become decisive. It was within this convergence of technology and human effort that the stage for a turning point was set. Across the countryside, snow-covered roads and frozen rivers hid troop movements. German units repositioned in anticipation of Allied offensives, unaware that a network of listening posts had already detected their subtle shifts. The U.S. Army Signal Corps, integrating intercepted data with reconnaissance and intelligence reports, began to map these movements with increasing accuracy. At the center of this network sat a young radio operator stationed in a nondescript building on the edge of a French village, alone, listening to the constant hum of static and distant crackles. He prepared for the routine intercept, record, transmit. Yet on this day, his receiver would pick up a transmission that seemed, on the surface, entirely ordinary. To the Germans, it would appear insignificant, a minor report among many, but to Allied analysts, it contained the exact coordinates and timing that would expose a critical weakness in German deployment. The tension was subtle, invisible to the naked eye, while generals mapped movements in grand rooms filled with warmth and certainty. A single American operator's workbench, cluttered with sheets of ciphered notes and worn equipment, was about to become the fulcrum on which the front pivoted. A seemingly small act taking a message, transmitting a signal, and trusting analysts to interpret it was about to reshape strategy, challenge assumptions, and set in motion a series of events that the Germans could neither anticipate nor prevent. In a cramped room at the edge of northern France, the U.S. radio operator embodied the quiet courage that often goes unnoticed in war. He was young, trained in Morse code and cryptography, yet faced with conditions far harsher than any classroom simulation: frost creeping through floorboards, static crackling in headphones, and the constant hum of tension. Isolation was part of the job. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of the key and the occasional crackle of distant German transmissions. Yet in those moments, the operator carried the weight of thousands of lives. One misread signal could send entire battalions into ambush. One accurately relayed message could save them. His work was invisible, yet essential. From a tactical standpoint, signals intelligence was a silent weapon, invisible yet devastating. Allied commanders relied on intercepted messages to anticipate German movements, plan counterattacks, and allocate resources with surgical precision. The value of one operator's diligence became clear when seemingly minor transmissions revealed logistical bottlenecks, troop redeployments, or vulnerable flanks. In this case, the intercepted signal contained precise coordinates of German units and projected timings of their movements. Allied commanders could calculate supply routes, identify weak points, and prepare forces to exploit gaps before German generals even realized the vulnerability existed. The technology itself was deceptively simple. Radios of the era were bulky, fragile, and prone to interference. Yet operators learned to coax clear signals from noisy airwaves. Morse code was unforgiving. A single misread dot or dash could distort the meaning of an entire message. Yet it was in this simplicity that the genius of signals intelligence lay. Operators monitored multiple frequencies simultaneously, cross-referenced data, and transmitted critical intercepts to analysts who could interpret patterns invisible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, the Germans relied on sophisticated encryption machines, like Enigma, convinced that their ciphers rendered messages indecipherable. They underestimated the combination of human skill, perseverance, and technological understanding possessed by Allied operators. The emotional stakes for the operator were immense, though invisible to most. He worked knowing that discovery by the enemy could mean immediate execution. His isolation magnified every doubt and fear, yet the importance of his task demanded focus beyond personal safety. Each signal carried weight, lives, strategy, and the unfolding of history itself, while German generals sat comfortably, analyzing maps and orders. He felt the front line in every pulse of static through the headphones. There was pride in the precision of his work, but also annoying tension. The German generals, confident in their experience and analytical routines, exemplified a critical failure of leadership. They had faced blitzkriegs and ambushes before, yet they underestimated the capacity of a single operator to influence events. In command rooms across France, officers pored over maps, assessing divisions, tank movements, and supply lines, often ignoring reports deemed minor or routine. Their dismissal of small-scale signals intelligence reflected a dangerous blind spot, one that would cost them both territory and lives. From the German perspective, radio traffic in occupied France was a constant background noise, something to be monitored but rarely taken seriously. Signals intercepted by Allied operators were seen as inconsequential chatter, yet these messages were the very threads that allowed the US and British intelligence to weave an accurate picture of troop locations, movements, and supply schedules. The enemy's underestimation of this invisible layer of warfare proved fatal. What they dismissed as trivial became a decisive lever. The moral dimension of this episode lies in the interplay between human diligence and wartime responsibility. The U.S. radio operator did not fire a shot, lead a battalion, or command a fleet, yet his actions directly affected the lives of soldiers on both sides. Strategically, the intercepted signal enabled the Allies to exploit weaknesses in German deployments, shifting the momentum of the front without direct confrontation. The operator's attention to detail logging each frequency, confirming every coordinate, and relaying the information to analysts demonstrated that intelligence work could change the calculus of warfare. The psychological impact on both sides was profound, though delayed. On the Allied side, confidence grew as intercepted messages confirmed suspicions and allowed preemptive maneuvers. On the German side, once the consequences of the ignored signal became apparent, shock and disbelief spread through the ranks. The realization that a lone operator, someone they had dismissed, anticipate movements and undermine deployments, struck at the heart of their confidence. January 18, 1944, 3:17 hours. The U.S. radio operator's fingers hovered over the Morse key, listening intently. A German supply convoy reported coordinates and projected movements. Meticulously, the operator transcribed the message and relayed it to Allied analysts in London. Within minutes, cross-referencing with reconnaissance revealed a 10-kilometer corridor in the German front left, lightly defended. By 7 o'clock, Allied commanders had repositioned artillery, infantry, and armored divisions to exploit the weakness. German generals, oblivious to the intercept, continued routine briefings. By 9:30, artillery struck precisely at the predicted locations. Confusion erupted among German units as orders were delayed, misrouted, or ignored. By midday, reconnaissance units advanced with minimal resistance, further exploiting the gap. The U.S. operator remained vigilant, monitoring shifts and relaying updates. By evening, Allied forces controlled the corridor. German commanders were forced into reactive maneuvers, abandoning prior plans. One signal, once dismissed, had reshaped the battlefield. By 14:15, Allied infantry advanced through the corridor. German counterattacks met prepared ambushes, suffering heavy losses. Commanders struggled with miscommunications and delayed reinforcements. Artillery and supply lines were disrupted. The operator's workbench, unassuming yet pivotal, dictated artillery, armored, and infantry movements. By 20 o'clock, the front had shifted irreversibly. German generals acknowledged that what they dismissed as a minor signal had determined the day's outcome. The operator's quiet diligence had redirected strategy, morale, and momentum. His unseen hand had rewritten the battlefield. By January 19th, Allied forces held the corridor, disrupting German supply chains and isolating units. German generals convened emergency meetings, acknowledging that disregarded signals had compromised positions. Allied intelligence traced the success to the operator's diligence, supply routes were secured, and future operations could be coordinated with greater efficiency. German morale suffered, confidence in conventional superiority was shaken. In the following weeks, the secured corridor allowed sustained Allied operations. German command revised communication protocols but could not reverse the strategic advantage gained. Losses in personnel and equipment were significant. The episode demonstrated the transformative power of intelligence, timing, and human skill. For the Allies, it validated the emphasis on signals networks. For the Germans, it highlighted the danger of dismissing even minor information. One operator, one signal, had changed the front and illustrated the invisible force of knowledge in modern warfare. War is often remembered in terms of battles, generals, and firepower. Yet, as this story shows, outcomes are equally shaped by quiet, unseen acts. One U.S. radio operator transformed a routine transmission into a decisive tool of strategy. His diligence, patience, and skill disrupted German plans, reshaped the front, and saved countless lives. The episode underscores that warfare is not only a contest of force, but of knowledge, timing, and foresight. The moral weight rests in conscientious action. An individual working in isolation can decisively influence events on a scale far beyond their apparent role. For the Germans, it was a lesson in hubris. Dismissing small signals as irrelevant left them vulnerable. History proves that even the faintest Morse-coded transmission can reverberate across battlefields. In the frozen outpost, the operator's quiet vigilance shifted the momentum of the war, proving that knowledge, precision, and human diligence can become as decisive as any weapon. One signal, one operator, one act of focus. This was the hidden architecture of change.